Hello and welcome everybody to AFP. I am David Goss, joined by a usual suspect in Sean Kay. We have a special conversation coming with the general manager of the first ever MLS NEXT Pro Cup champion, Wray. Sean knows him from his TFC days. I've known him for years from the youth soccer and development scene around North America. He came from Toronto to Columbus, and he won the first ever title overwhelmingly. His team led the league in both goals scored and least goals conceded through. We'll talk to Wray about that in just a moment, the general manager of Crew 2, as well as the assistant general manager of Columbus Crew. All right, let's get into our interview now with maybe the most special guest we have ever had on this show, a good friend of all of us here at AFP. He is the assistant general manager of Columbus Crew, and he is the general manager of Columbus Crew 2. Corey, thanks for joining us.
Thank you guys very much for having me. Very excited to be here.
So, Corey, let's start with congrats. You're the first ever champions of MLS NEXT Pro. How does championship feel on this fine morning?
Thankfully, this interview is on Tuesday. I think on Sunday morning, it was feeling a little bit rough and then faded a bit to Monday. But I feel much better after the celebrations on Saturday. So it was a good night.
You've won a couple titles. For anyone who doesn't know, former front office member of Toronto FC, longtime member of Toronto FC, then moved to Columbus, won an MLS Cup there, and now here winning MLS NEXT Pro. Do you have any tips, levels of expertise that you've learned on what to do after you win?
I think I gave it to myself on Saturday was to enjoy it, right? I think, despite some of the successes that certainly I've had, and, there's been now a few, I almost went home and just lied on my couch and I had to convince myself, that you shouldn't take these things for granted by any means. And it's important to get everybody together to appreciate, the experience. And I think I listened to myself, regretfully so, the next day. And I dove right into it head first, and I had a really good time with a lot of the staff and, made sure everybody had a really good night. And I think that's what it's all about, to reflect, all the hard work and the times we had this year. I mean, there was nothing and then there was a cup. So it happened pretty quickly, but that takes a lot of effort and dedication and hard work. And so I think it's right to really get everyone together and have a great night out of it. And that we definitely did.
Yeah, Corey, you had sort of mentioned that obviously, like last time this year, there wasn't really this. And going into sort of this year at MLS NEXT Pro, what was sort of your vision in regards to what the league was going to be like? And sort of then now at the end, looking back after the first year, was it everything that you thought it was going to be? Where were there changes? I know it's a loaded question, but like from where you were a year ago looking at MLS NEXT Pro to where you are today, was it the full experience?
For sure. There's a couple things that maybe people didn't know. But originally, when I came here, we had discussions about where the second team's even going to fit. At the time, there wasn't even an MLS option. And so we were looking, in USL, where we had previous experience with Toronto FC too, and tried to figure things out in that way. And because of the pandemic, they really pushed things back a little bit. And so I definitely had a lot of time to reflect on, what it could look like. And of course, being in a league, that helps when you're planning a roster. And so when it did become apparent that we were able to put something together, we kind of came together with a number of teams that didn't have a second team last year. And we ran a pilot program, and that pilot program just gave us friendlies against, New York City, Orlando City. We played Philadelphia Union, and we played Chicago Fire, and we were able to see what we had internally in a couple different phases. The first was with our collegiate efforts. The Columbus Crew has historically sent a number of kids to college, and so there was a ton of kids out there in that ecosystem that I was not familiar with, and that allowed us to evaluate that group of players. And then what we did is we also had our best academy kids in at the time from our 19s, and we put them together to see the different levels. And then finally we ran the program as just an academy only kind of option with maybe a couple trialists and see what that looked like. And so we were able to really test out where we stood. And frankly, we found that there was a really big need for more talent underneath in that group. Either the group was too young and not ready for the level, or we were just missing, a lot of different profiles and opportunities for guys to do well. It's very different than in Toronto, where we were able to build a group out of the local talent, and definitely take our licks, but provide them with, we had so many different profiles. You could build a team over the span of a few years. Well, here you might have a few really good players, and then the supporting group definitely wasn't going to be able to compete. I think one of our last couple of games we played the Philadelphia Union, we lost 6-0. I think at that time, Laurent, he thought he was going to get fired before he even got hired. And he said, no, this is perfect. This gives us every opportunity to evaluate where we're at. We see where guys are. And we know that the Philadelphia Union are, the standard in terms of quality when it comes to their academy and what they do underneath with their pathway. And so it gave us a really good idea of what we could be if we go out and recruit the right level of talent. And so that's kind of where it ended with that phase. And then what we expected, I think, what changed quite a bit. Even leading into the first week, we didn't really know a whole lot about how each group was preparing. I had a number of conversations with everyone, but I think the league caught up quickly enough to some of the challenges in terms of staffing, and obviously the people that were supporting the league itself was all being hired at the same time that we were building a team. So there were some early bumps, but after that, I felt like it really grew into a really strong competition. And I think any teams that underestimated what some of the quality of the teams would be quickly tried to remedy that and tried to sign some guys in the summer and provide us with some really good games to end the year. So it course corrected pretty quickly.
You've already leaned into a few of the topics we want to dig into with, especially the Canadian presence on this team. But
sure,
you mentioned running TFC2. I know that was League One Ontario for some time, but USL for a lot of time. Before we get to this specific team, I want to ask about the two leagues. What are the differences? And I think there was some fear, I know from some people I talked to, about, USL, you go and play the New Mexicos, the Louisvilles of the world, senior teams that have senior experience players, as well as those atmospheres. And there's a worry about what MLS Next Pro will be up against that in terms of for development. And so I'm just curious what you thought of this year and sort of the differences, advantages or disadvantages of this setup now for the development pipeline here in North America.
Yeah, I think, look, we were in the early days of the transition of the USL in the championship, and it was certainly not what it is now. And so, understanding that they've then built off of, the league partnership with MLS, and they've grown with great ownership groups and built fan bases, and they put a ton behind their, sales and marketing. So I wasn't expecting us to be at that level by any means in the first year of something that was just, launching. So the differences are clear. You aren't able to come up against as many of those teams. And certainly there is a fan base that is probably just starting out in terms of understanding what these teams are all about. But the potential is there. So for a couple years, if you're missing that, okay, that's not great. But I also wouldn't say that every player would be necessarily only playing in Next Pro over the course of the next few years in their pathway. And I don't see why there isn't an opportunity to throw a player into the USL Championship if there's, a really good fan base or maybe an older group that they can benefit from, or that someone's blocked in terms of their pathway here. So it's about using each level. But I do understand the arguments of not being able to play against some of those older teams, but it depends on the level of resistance that the players need in your group. And while that would be great for us, it's certainly, I felt like we had enough, I guess. Well, maybe we didn't have enough because we did so well, but there were certainly games that provided us with challenges, and there was rosters week in and week out that changed because of, the home team putting down some really talented play. I mean, the first game we played, Inter Miami had Emerson carve us like to shreds, and that was a 2 million plus investment, and so you're definitely not getting that in USL. And so there was players that have really good MLS experience, or young players that needed some more consistency that we're playing against. That on the flip side, I definitely would never have seen that in USL against some of these other teams. So there's definitely give or take. We never expected it to be like the USL Championship, but we did want to make sure that the games were, of a professional nature, provided our guys with opportunities to showcase themselves and put them in situations to learn. And I got to say, we definitely got that out of this season.
Keeping up with sort of that, David had mentioned like the Canadian conversation. I think something that made a bit of waves earlier in the season was your guys signing Mo Farsi to a deal, and sort of having the fans have that conversation of is that the pathway that most players are going to go, and how is it going to continue? What is it about this Canadian Premier League that, like, do you feel like you guys were the only ones sort of not watching, but like scouting and looking to see that as an opportunity for Next Pro? Or do you think, or is there a lot of people keeping their eye on it from the developmental side?
I think clearly your Vancouvers, Montreals, and Torontos are pretty aware of it. There's been a couple USL teams that have moved a player or two over the last couple of years, but certainly I don't know about the overall in-depth scouting that's going on with some of the other USL teams. I don't know why. As a Canadian and someone who's very familiar with it, the quality is great, and the structure and the games they get. So should there be more people looking at it? Of course, and that's up to them how they allocate their scouting resources. But for me, it was really clear to see that there's players who've been given an opportunity to compete in a team that, has to win each week and has to perform in front of, crowds, and have things on the line that can benefit from then moving from there to here in terms of everything else, right? Behind the scenes, what does the training look like? The facilities, the nutrition, the sports performance, like that's the stuff that we're able to put around these guys that maybe they don't have the resources in the CPL to do, consistently for a number of reasons, but they do get the game side of there. So we felt like we could put, someone like Mo in this situation, expose them to first team trainings, give them the necessary additional resources, and let them fly. And I think that was the sales pitch from me. It was difficult again because there was no league. So I was like, forget the league. Like, look at everything else we have here, right? Like, we're going to surround you with everyone else, and we'll see what the league looks like. But the games, what we spoke to most of the guys, the games are like the icing on the top of your development cake, and the rest of it behind you. We're not looking game by game for those benefits. We're looking, month by month, and by the end of the year, where do you stand? And so that was kind of a different approach for him. We said, we're going to try to make you better in certain areas, and we're going to build off of that so that it's more individualized. And I think that for someone, knowing you're going to put something into that player, and definitely full credit to Tommy and those guys at Calvary. They took him and made him, young player of the year, but there was a little bit more that could even go deeper into what Mo needed, where he's not necessarily, just preparing for games and trying to win each week. We're clearly trying to do well and stick to the process, but we could really focus on a little bit more for him and give him the opportunity to showcase himself. So again, the player, there's Canadians and there's Americans and there's players. We're looking for good players with potential, and it just so happens that maybe I have a bit more comfort in that market, but those are definitely good players, and they're being given opportunities. So the question would be, why wouldn't we look there? And so that's maybe a little bit different for us than other teams, but also, having a little bit of history, in and around that program, and being able to, be pretty comfortable. Maybe that gave us a little bit of an advantage, but I certainly got a lot of text after we signed them saying good signing from MLS teams. So clearly people are watching. It's just about, convincing the player of the right project after that.
You you obviously, when I look at your roster, when I look at your team, you sort of mentioned what you saw last year when you saw the players that you had available to you through the Columbus Crew Academy and whatnot, some of the deficiencies. And I know I've spoken with you and your new academy director and Tim Bezbachenko and everyone else about sort of the work you guys are doing to try and catch Columbus up from an academy point of view. That always takes time. It feels like you found this in-between space of a way to bridge the gap by signing some homegrowns from other teams, signing players like a Mo Farsi who are out there but still young that can develop. It feels like you found this good middle ground where you had Parente and Zawadzki who are always going to be sort of the core of this team and Schulte who you draft, but then the way you built the rest of this roster, it feels very unique but also very purposeful.
100%. The gap was too big. And we had an opportunity on the first team with the roster, probably being one of the older rosters, to start to really fill that next level of 20 to 22 years old. I'd say 19 to 23, underneath that, and then have the academy, start to rebuild under there from, U12, U13, all the way up to that. So knowing that each stage is going to take time, we probably couldn't really just throw out a U19 Academy Plus team. It didn't make any sense. And so that gap in between gave us the opportunity to connect those guys who have first team potential that could roll into the first team over the next year or two, which is exactly the ages we need. And also the most important thing was to create an environment for those next group of young academy players so they could actually see what it should be like when they do get there or when they're actually called upon, to influence matches in that. And I think that was a big learning from my time and our time in Toronto was that while they were super talented young guys, they were all looking at each other for what do I do? How do I keep the standard every day? And it's not their fault, but we're able to produce a group here that is, guiding through their actions, guiding through their experiences. A lot of them were pros somewhere, right? At least they've gone through their first year being a pro. They have some lessons behind them. And so that was a really purposeful kind of group of players that we brought in to develop the environment so that then the next group, when they're ready, could be ready to pass that kind of advice down to then the next level. So we didn't have that. And it was a huge glaring need within the group. And I think we already have seen a lot of benefits. We've had some young guys pop in and make appearances here and there. They're really going to be tasked next year to really start to fill in the depth spots and then slowly but surely age into a competitive roster, by year 3 or 4. So it's definitely intentional. It's all lined up with what we were missing and certainly it went better than we expected, but it made sense when you put it on paper. It made sense. Like when you explain it to me, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. And that's exactly what we did.
Speaking of development, just in an overall, like where do you feel Major League Soccer's development growth is right now compared to, let's say, the rest of the world? And then also, like, what do you think that the Crew are doing now that's sort of pushing the boundaries and trying to innovate? Is there anything that your team's doing that's a bit different?
Yeah, for sure. So MLS, I think it's pretty well documented the increase of, I guess, young players moving through the pathway and out of the league. And I think that has been kind of happening behind the scenes. Certainly Dave's been at a lot of youth tournaments with me and seen the scouts and agents and everybody growing in size. And I think that has been happening over the last, 4 to 5 years, where when it used to show up, there'd be a couple, and now there's, every German club is represented. You got the English Premier League clubs there. You have, Spanish clubs now, and you're starting to see a real big interest in the league. And so in terms of the change over the years, that's been massive, because it certainly, if I could speak from a Canadian perspective, I think probably 4 or 5 years ago, I went on a trip to try to market and promote even just the idea that Canada has good young soccer players. And I think that didn't go so well. And so I came back a little bit distraught. But it was clear that, I could see that we did, and it was clear that things were slowly starting to change underneath, thanks to a lot of the academies and obviously the participation and all those things aligning. But I had conversations with, youth sporting directors where the same old cliches, I thought you guys are hockey players. I don't think we'd be very interested in those players coming in over for a trial. And now, especially in my conversations with agents, and that it's like a hot commodity, right? I want the next, Alfonso Davies. I want the next David. I want all. Of course, now it's easy for them to understand that, but of course now it's way more expensive, and so you try to help people as much as you can. And obviously, being a proud Canadian, I was doing the good work for the country, but I did believe, and I think a lot of people that were there knew that these kids could play and they can hang, and it's been well documented now that there's definitely an opportunity, whether it's American or Canadian, for those players in the best leagues in the world, and it just requires people to give them a chance, and I think that's been happening, and people are much more comfortable spending that money. I think now it's been clear that while it is more money, it's still a good avenue if you're looking for maybe some bargains versus some other countries. And at the end of the day, the coaching has improved. The education for the coaches has improved. The facilities, as you guys know, they're unbelievable. Like when we sit here and talk about in Ohio alone, the training grounds and stadiums that these two clubs have, never in my wildest dreams would I have ever imagined in Ohio, that would be the place you would see facilities like that. And so that's happening across the US.
You guys play MLS Next Pro in an MLS stadium, and there's a second MLS stadium in your market.
We have another one. Yeah. It's incredible, the growth over the years, certainly that we've all seen. And so that all underneath these things that take a little bit of time, it all contributes. And I think you start to catch up really quickly. And then finally, the players are so professional in their approach. I mean, they are. I don't think we have a lot of the issues of guys being paid too much and just being not kind of respectful to their coaches. All the problems that plague youth soccer over in some of the top countries where they're superstars at such an early age. Well, we have some of that. I don't think the players are necessarily at that level yet where they're not going to listen to whatever the coach says. They don't want to do the extra gym work and stuff. These guys are so professional from a young age. In fact, they're very boring because they're so dedicated to the game. I mean, I'm sitting there waiting, for a kid to sneak out or something. And the one thing you might do is, drink an extra Gatorade or something. It's incredible that these guys are so dedicated, and it really goes a long way when you're investing in a young player. You're not going to have a lot of problems. And I think that's a big deal as well. So Canadian, US, these players, they want it. And at the end of the day, you can kind of count on now maybe more of a brand where they're going to do whatever it takes once they get over there as well. And they're not maybe as swayed by some of the other things that come along with the fame. And so that these guys have now been able to establish themselves in the biggest leagues in the world. I'm not surprised.
You mentioned opportunity. It's not just opportunity for players. One of the things we always talk about is opportunity for team admins and athletic trainers and general managers and coaches, right? More jobs to get that experience. You guys went with Laurent Quarta in year one. Laurent, excuse me. He obviously fairly successful throughout the regular season and then into the championship. What was it about him that sort of you guys leaned on as the guy to start this whole process for you? And then what's the thought process in terms of what success at MLS Next Pro could mean to the next level, especially at a club where there's now a head coaching vacancy in Major League Soccer?
Yeah, for sure. So Laurent, clearly a pretty great playing resume, played for some big clubs in England and Spain. And I think that's pretty well documented. What was really unique about him is he came to MLS. He had a couple experiences in MLS with some coaches that I think we all know pretty well in terms of Greg and Robin. And he was able to really understand what a second team setup could be like when he was like a player coach in LA. And then things changed there, and they went a different direction with the whole, I guess, group underneath. And he was looking for something different. And he was here in Columbus as an academy coach and wanted to, just learn and try to grow as a person. I think that's the most unique thing about him is his humility and his desire to learn more. And he could go the complete other way given his background, and he could be a completely different person based on, experiences I've had. And he's super humble and just hungry to learn and very open-minded. And I think when we watched how he did a lot of his sessions and what his games look like in the academy, it was clear that there was a vision for how he wanted to play within, the constructs of the academy. And it was clear that he was doing things that were aligned with the way in which we all saw the game here from Tim down. And so we consider this, and I think, Sean mentioned, what we're doing differently or how we see things in the club. This is a pathway, for everyone. And it's the same thing you mentioned, Dave. This is a pathway for staff and for the players, but also for the coaches. And so if we can put those guys in a place to be protected and to make mistakes and also to try things out, I think you can get a really good growth in a person. And I think he was surprised at how much we were going to support him and his ideas, as crazy as he thought they were, and how much we would stand behind them regardless of, what it looked like, even as far as, the semifinals of the goalkeeper getting, chipped from half. It was something we agreed to from the very beginning. And we were going to expose the guys. And so we talk about like Laurent and the opportunity here. He's still a very new coach, but someone we believe in a lot and someone we're going to support as much as possible. And so, in terms of where we see the club going, and that I think you'll probably see more ideas similar to what we've been doing underneath, with the academy and second team. And certainly Laurent is someone we're going to lean on, to definitely, get a lot of those concepts, I guess spread as much as possible. And certainly, we have an opening, and I think he'd be someone we're going to speak to, a number of times throughout the process and give him a chance to even solidify maybe some more of his thoughts when it comes to a first team level, and then go from there. But it is his first, kind of real pro job, and so there are some things we're still hoping to advance with him day to day. But what a tremendous prospect for us to have in our organization. And that's, again, the investment and the different side of things we're trying to do is really, really grow a pathway from top to bottom in every single position and not just players. And if we can do that, then you start to really set things up for succession rates and things like that within the club, where we can really continue on despite, people getting promoted, people getting plucked, people moving elsewhere. If we can establish that, cycle, I think that is something unique for us, where we're Columbus. We can't just go out and pay for everything and be the top spenders. We're not going to do that. So if we can really hone in on our resources, which are our people and our players and obviously all our facilities, I think that will give us the edge that we need. And that's a little bit more unique to us as well versus some of the other teams that, have other avenues of doing things. So the final piece is for us. I guess it's trying to be as innovative as possible. And so, when we talk about the people and all that, to have someone like Laurent who buys into, some ideas that we have on the game and the way we see things, I think that will be something we're looking for, for the rest of the time that we're here is like-minded people in that area. And I have to give, Caleb credit. He did whatever he could to get the results. And so it's not by any means a knock on anything he did, but the alignment from top to bottom is what we're really looking for. And I think that will be a little bit more apparent as we move forward. And I think that's something that will really give us an edge as much as we can get here in Columbus.
Corey, I could do this all day. We could talk scouting networks. We could talk We could talk Caleb Borneo and Jackson Lindmore. We could talk, development so much. It's my favorite, and we appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much once again to Corey Wray for joining us. Congratulations on winning the first ever MLS Next Pro Cup. Congratulations on all the success they had, the soccer they played, so much more. And of course, we're going to continue to track all the news at the MLS level with Columbus. We'll be in the Discord with all of you who are Patreon subscribers, and anyone who's not. Patreon.com/afootballpodcast. You want to be there. Now is the time to be there. Thank you to Sean for co-hosting. Shouts to Devang Desai for being out there, as well as Greg on, as he would say, the ones and twos. Have a good one, everyone, and we'll talk to you again next time.